Hey guys, so we are still working on being able to calculate how much energy an object has. And in our last lesson, we talked about potential energy. Recall there were two different kinds. There was potential energy from gravity and potential energy due to something springy or stretchy. Today in our lesson, we're going to talk about a different kind of energy relating to an object's motion, and that is kinetic energy. So kinetic energy is energy that an object has because of its motion. Okay, so whereas potential energy was energy it had because of where it is, its position, kinetic energy is energy that an object has because of its motion. And it depends on two things. It depends on the object's mass. So a heavier object will have more kinetic energy than a lighter object. And it depends on the object's velocity. So a faster object will have more kinetic energy than a slower object. Okay. When we talk about kinetic energy, we'll usually use as a variable Ke for potential energy, for kinetic energy. And we'll measure kinetic energy in the same unit we use to measure any kind of energy. We'll use joules. So the joule will measure our kinetic energy. We can calculate the kinetic energy of an object. It's really quite simple. We have a formula there. The kinetic energy is equal to 1/2 the mass times the velocity squared. So using those things, we can solve some problems. Okay, now I have a couple example problems for us to take a look at. So let's solve some example problems and see how we're going to use this equation. Okay, the first example I have up here, it says a 25.0 kilogram object moves at 10.0 meters per second. How much kinetic energy does it have? So just like any kind of physics problem, the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to go through the problem and I'm going to decide what are the different numbers and what is it asking me to find. So I look up in the problem and the first number I see there, it says 25.0 kilograms. And because it's kilograms, I know that that's the mass. So I'm going to write down m equals 25.0 kilograms. The next number I see is 10.0 meters per second. And meters per second tells me that's a velocity. So I'm going to write down in my list of things here, I'm going to write down v equals 10.0 meters per second. And the question asks me, how much kinetic energy? So that's what it's asking me to find. It's asking me to find kinetic energy. So I'm going to write down Ke equals question mark, because that's the thing I don't know. That's the thing that I want to find. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my equation that we just learned for kinetic energy. Ke equals 1/2 mv squared. And I'm going to put some numbers in there. Okay, so I don't know Ke. Ke is what I'm looking for. So in my equation, I'm going to leave Ke right there. But the 1/2 stays 1/2. The mass, m, it says is 25.0, and v is 10.0. And don't forget that that v is squared. Very common mistake, people forget it's v squared. So I'm going to put 10.0 squared. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I am going to kind of work out the math. You can see my variable is on one side and all of my numbers are on the other side. So it's a nice easy situation. I'm going to get my calculator and I'm going to type 1/2 times 25.0 times 10.0 squared. And if you look at your numbers, we need 3 significant figures in the answer. And so we'll round off the answer to 1,250. And because this is energy, we're going to put the unit joules along with that. So 1,250 joules. Okay, that was a nice easy problem because we didn't have to do any algebra because they were asking us to find the kinetic energy. The kinetic energy was already all on its own on one side of the equation. So let's take a look at another problem where we will have to do a little bit of algebra. This next problem, it says a 5.0 kilogram object moves with 40.0 joules of kinetic energy. How fast does it move? So just like any problem, I'm going to start off by identifying what it's told me and what it's asked me to do. So the first number I see in the problem, it says 5.0 kilograms. And kilograms tells me that's a mass. So I'm going to write down m equals 5.0 kilograms. The next number I see, it says 40.0 joules. And joules tells me this is a kind of energy. And if you read further into the sentence, it says kinetic energy. So I know this is the kinetic energy. I'm going to write down Ke equals 40.0 joules. And then the question asked, how fast does it move? So it's asking me to find the velocity. So all right, v equals question mark. That's the thing that I'm looking for. That's what they want me to find. Okay, so I know I'm going to use the equation ke equals 1/2 mv squared. And I'm going to put the numbers in that equation. So ke is 40.0, just like it says. 1/2 is just going to stay right there. M, the mass, is 5.0. And v is what we don't know. It's what they asked us to find. So I'm going to leave a v right there in the equation. And I'm not going to forget that's v squared. So I'm going to put the little squared on there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work out some of the math in there. Okay, so I can see on the one side of the equation it says 1/2 times 5.0. So I'm going to multiply 1/2 times 5.0 and just kind of simplify what's on that side there. So 1/2 of 5 is 2.5, and it's still two significant figures. So I'm going to have on my next line 40.0 equals 2.5 v squared. And then of course you could probably look at that and very easily determine that you're going to want to divide both sides by 2.5. So 40.0 divided by 2.5 is going to give you 16. And keep in mind, when you do 40.0 divided by 2.5, that 40.0 is 3 significant figures, 2.5 is 2 significant figures, so your answer now, the 16, should have 2 significant figures. And on the other side of the equation, we still have v squared. Now, I don't want v squared, I'm not interested in v squared, I want v, so I need to get rid of the squared. And how do you get rid of the squared? What's the opposite of squared? The opposite of squared is the square root. So now I'm going to do the square root of both sides. So the square root of v squared is v, and the square root of 16 is 4. But of course I need 2 significant figures because 16 had 2 significant figures. So I'm not just going to put 4, I'm going to put 4.0. Okay. So my answer there is 4.0, and then I need a unit for that. This was a velocity, so we have to think, what's the units for velocity? And the units for velocity are meters per second. So my answer there, v equals 4.0 meters per second. Okay, so there's a little bit about kinetic energy. We've done a couple example problems there. Kinetic energy, Ke, it's measured in joules, 1/2 times the mass times the velocity squared. Hopefully that helps us out in being able to calculate how much energy an object has. So until next time.